Now you can start.
Welcome to the PC-BSD talk. This is going to be a little different from what you've heard this morning. More of a focus on the desktop, obviously. If you've come to previous talks that I've done, you've probably heard about what PC-BSD is. It's a desktop distribution of FreeBSD. And you've also heard about our installation software, how we differ in those ways. Today we're going to be looking at some different parts of PC-BSD, though you may not be familiar with, unless you're actually running it day to day. First of all, a lot of people ask, what is PC-BSD? I mean, is this FreeBSD? What's going on here? And if you take a quick look, it sure looks like FreeBSD to me. And in fact, it is. It's 100% FreeBSD under the hood. Then people ask, okay, you're FreeBSD. Why in the world are you reading PC-BSD and changing things around? Well, it started because of this. FreeBSD works real well in this environment. Where it tends to be a bit more difficult to work on would be in this environment. Unless, of course, you are what I consider a power user, which does limit your market options just a tad bit. PC-BSD is going to attempt to bridge this divide and bring it to everyone else who ordinarily would not be able to use FreeBSD. And we do this by focusing on something I call the 4 E's. We're going to be talking about easy to install, which we solve with the graphical installer. Easy to use, a default desktop such as KDE4 right out of box. Easy to configure, which will be custom GUI tools, utilities, things that make doing the dirty work on FreeBSD not so difficult for your average end user who doesn't know anything about a shell prompt. And then we also have our easy to load binary packages, which would be our PBI format, which is more of a standalone type install shield, Mac-ish, clone-ish deal, where a Windows user or Mac user can move over to PC-BSD and immediately feel comfortable knowing that they can load any of their applications. But today we're going to be discussing the actual tools that we've written, the third step in that easy to use list there. And here's how we enhance FreeBSD. First I'm going to walk you through how we build a FreeBSD system in case anybody's never heard about this before. First, we start with a clean FreeBSD install. Right now we're building on 7.1 pre-release, so pretty standard. Occasionally we might throw a few extra patches in there that haven't made it into the FreeBSD release yet. For example, there was a Flash patch recently which fixes Flash 9 support. So we're going to go ahead and include that until it makes it into the base. Next thing we do is we go ahead and we build all our ports. We build X, KDE, Qt, Flash, whatever ports we decide we're going to ship with this release of PC-BSD. The third step is we then go ahead and build our utilities. These are the custom tools and utilities that me and other developers have helped create for PC-BSD specifically to make it easier to use. Next, we apply something we call the overlay data, which is our custom configurations for FreeBSD to make it more friendly out of box for a laptop or a desktop and just make it work a little better for that situation. And then next we build the LZMA file. That's how we distribute it. It's highly compressed, so we can fit it on a couple CDs or a DVD. And last, we go ahead and create our boot media, which right now it may be CDs, DVDs, USB, and we may add more options in the future. And those are essentially a heavily modified Frisbee script, modified to the point you probably wouldn't recognize a lot of it now, but that's what it is. Now we're going to go ahead and dig into the tools and utilities that we've designed and developed. First of all the code is available in Subversion. So everything I'm going to talk about today you can get from our Subversion site. It's all easily available. All the GUIs are written in C++ using Qt4 and in some cases KDE4 API, which proves useful in a lot of cases. And we have a few utilities written in Shell or C, depending as the need calls for it. First of all, we have a couple tools here for the install and initial setup. We have a system installer, X configuration tool, and a sound setup tool. This is the one you've probably all seen if you've ever done PC-BSD install. That's what you get when you boot up. It brings you up to a nice graphical interface that will walk you through doing the installation of PC-BSD. It does all the tasks such as the initial install, setting up locale, users, disk options, file system options. Do you want to run on UFS, journaling, ZFS, set up custom partitioning, etc. It then goes ahead, after you've set all those options, it just extracts our big LZMA image off and puts it on the disk for you. It's running in a UZIP compressed RAM disk. This is where we differ a little bit from Frisbee. And the reason for this being was when you boot up off a traditional live CD such as Frisbee, you'll notice that you can't eject the disk because it's loaded off the disk. That wouldn't work for us when we need to load off 3 or 4 CDs, or you want to be able to switch media during the installation because you couldn't unmount it without killing your X session. So we go ahead and we require a little bit more RAM, 256 megs in this case. It loads that into memory and then performs the installation. The next tool we've written is one you see immediately after rebooting, and this is our X configuration tool. This is basically a front end for xorg.com. It includes options for setting up drivers, dual head support, and include pretty much all the drivers out of box, including NVIDIA binary drivers, so you can get a working 3D compositing enabled desktop within a few seconds using this. It runs the very first time you start the system after installation, or you can rerun it anytime by selecting option 7 during the loader boot splash screen, and that comes in useful if you're going to switch video cards, and like me, you like to tinker and yank out different ones and try new ones. The next tool we've written is a sound setup daemon, which consists really of 2 programs, our Sound Detect and Sound Error program. Sound Detect is written entirely in C and loads XML files, which will match looking for your PCI configuration to see which module should be loaded for which card. It goes ahead and does that. What's really cool about this program is we can add new modules on the fly. Where sound error comes in is if for some reason we don't have your module in our database, which we have a lot now, it will pop up a warning when you first boot and say, hey, I could not detect your sound card. Please send this diagnostic sheet to support at PCBSD.org, and that has the PCI conf output, so I can go ahead and figure out what has he got, what module does he need. We can then issue an update on our website, and the Sound Detect program is smart enough that when it boots up the next time, it'll fetch that from the website if it wasn't able to find a match in the database, and then it'll bring up sound. So often somebody will send me a file and say, hey, I got no sound. All I tell them to do is just reboot and it'll work. And that's very simple. They reboot, it comes right up. That is coming very valuable. These are some of our networking tools we've written. Again, if you've worked on PC-BSD, you've probably seen them, but they're pretty self-explanatory. Let's take a little closer look at them. First of all, we have our wired configuration tool, which again looks very simple, and it is designed to be simple. Remember, we're trying to target it, not your hardcore kernel hacker, not the people who know how to go to the command prompt and set up all kinds of weird options. Just somebody who wants to go, hey, I need a static IP, DHCP, or maybe a few other things. It provides, like I said, the configuration of wired network devices. It just writes stuff to rc.conf. And then we have an info tab, which I'm not showing here, but it provides some basic traffic statistics. So you can kind of see packets coming and going, you see any errors that may have been reported on the card. So it does provide some useful info, but again, if you want more, you'll dig down into the command prompt. This is the tool I use a lot. If you're running on a laptop, the Wi-Fi setup tool, which again is a necessity if you're going to be running on any kind of laptop nowadays. Provides a setup of your wireless devices, and now it supports with the last update profiles. So you can go ahead and add as many wireless networks as you like, and it goes ahead and adds them to your WPA supplement file, which of course does all the handling of figuring out which one to connect to based on strength and if encryption's enabled, etc. It does a really good job of it. It's also able to scan, and it's real nice, just like you would expect on any other desktop. It just shows you what's there, and you click if you want to connect to it. Set up your configuration encryption keys. Next, we have our device, our network device manager DNS setup tool. You can't see it because it's under the advanced tab here. But it also does some things. It lets you see all the NICs that are on the system, first of all, and then it launches the relevant configuration for that NIC. So it's able to tell, okay, this is a wireless device, this is an Ethernet device, and load the appropriate configuration for it. It also provides an option to display or hide a tray icon, which will run down in your taskbar, providing you status about that, and I'll talk about that in a second. Under the Advanced tab, it also gives you options for DNS, gateway, PBI configuration, which, again, your average user is going to need access to that eventually. We also have a firewall manager, which we've had developed. Again, very simple, very clean, easy for a user to immediately sit down and go, okay, I can turn on my firewall, etc. It's a front end to pf.conf. It lets you enable, disable, and one of the cool things I like to say is it's simple. It is not FW Builder. If you want to use FW Builder, you go right ahead, but this is for your average desktop user again. So they're looking to say, I want to download a torrent file. How do I open the port so I can connect to torrents type deal? Next is the network tray monitor, and you can see it's the icon on the very bottom right-hand corner there. If you hold the mouse over it, you get a whole bunch of information showing you what's going on with your wireless connection. Very lightweight application, which is good because I hate having heavy tray applications sitting there eating up CPU cycles. Just shows the status for a NIC, notifies you with a small pop-up whenever the NIC configuration changes, say the interface goes down or the IP changes, it'll just pop up and say, hey, something's changed here, maybe you want to take a look into this. It's most useful for Wi-Fi. I usually close it for the Ethernet configuration because usually you're on a static connection there and it's not going to be changing all that often. Next we have our system management tools. There's a little bit more going on here that we've written. First of all, we have our online updater. This again is a tray application, very light, which is good, so you can leave it open. It provides notification about available updates to your system. And these are updates that we issue. And it also provides notifications about the PBI updates. PBIs are your software, executables, if you will. So if you have an old version of Firefox, it'll pop up and say, hey, there's a new version, for whatever reason, security update, and it'll let you download and update that. The new version also supports a full range of proxy server setups, and that was a problem with recent versions in the past, but now we have added that functionality. This is another tool we've written, our PBI removal tool, which again lists the software you have installed. And very point and click, again, mom and dad, desktop user, very easy for them to just say, hey, I want to remove this program, and it just does it. It does a few other things. It also lets you add and remove system source, port street, and optional KDE components. So for example, when we issue a release of PC-BSD, we'll include the system source on CD or DVD. We'll also include the port tree that we use to build with it. So if there's any modifications we have to do to the ports, you can grab those and install them via this utility. It installs from your original installation media, or you can tell it to fetch them from the internet because we put them all up on the FTP site at the time of release. And the KDE components, those may be things such as my educational games package, my games package, maybe K-Office in the future, those type of applications. Sometimes you don't want them on your desktop, so it makes it easy for you to remove. The next tool we've written is our system manager. And this is what the initial screen looks like on this. Provides all the system and hardware information. So again, when you're doing troubleshooting, this is the place to go. Generates diagnostic sheets. I use these from time to time. This will give you everything you want to know about the system. So when you get some newbie end user who's emailing you or calling you, you say, give me this diagnostic sheet, and then we figure out what's going on. Give you the D-message output, PCI conf, any errors, etc. Also gives you options to fetch system source and run port snap in a GUI, which comes in handy if you like updating ports frequently. And also we have support for the boot up splash screens that FreeBSD supports in here as well. We default to leaving them off, but this would be where you would enable them if you so chose. And the reason we defaulted to having them off, just in case you're curious, is occasionally it causes crashes with XOR. We found the hard way. Next is our user manager. Again, you'll see right here it looks very simple at first. Add and remove users, edit users. It also supports an advanced mode, which will let you dig in a little further and modify groups, edit groups, change the members. You can do a little more with that. Now another tool we've written, this one doesn't have a screenshot because it's a command line tool. This is our PBI delete tool. Earlier we showed you the tool where you can remove all your PBIs or add or remove. This is basically the command line version of that. So if you're going to be scripting an install or setting something up where you want it to load various services of PBI, this would be the tool to use it to clean up your PBI database. This is another interesting one that not many people know about that I use a lot. It's the a front end to Q settings. If anybody's familiar with Qt, they have a Q settings API in there, which is almost like a registry. Basically, for your GUI programs, it lets you set keys and say, okay, here's the user options, here's what he saved. I decided it would be really cool if we had a program at the command line which would let you access a registry, so to speak, and use it in any other programs that you were writing. So, for example, we have a lot of shell scripts. And these shell scripts may say, okay, I want to stay current with what the GUI says, so we'll go ahead and read in the GUI settings in this way, and then we can act on whatever information comes back from a registry. Editing PCB apps is really easy. We have used, again, Qt4. So by default on the system, you have the designer-Qt4 program, which is your UI graphical designer, which lets you just kind of design the look and feel for your GUIs. And then you would go ahead and actually rewrite the code at this point. And then compiling it, you'll have a project file, which we include in Subversion. You just QMake it, which creates your valid makefile, and then you make it. If you want to dig in a little further, though, I'd recommend you check out Trolltech's documentations for all the Qt APIs. Quite good documentation. And here's something I talked about earlier, the overlay directory. These are something that we have in Subversion. You'll look at this and you'll recognize a lot from FreeBSD. This is where we go ahead and contain all the changes we've made to FreeBSD aside from our own custom programs. For example, we'll have almost a FreeBSD directory tree in Subversion, which has all our modified files, DevFS rules, rc.conf, anything we've modified to make it work better out of the box on the desktop. This would be where you find it, and it's real nice because if you commit to it, it just shows up in the next release. It's all automated. And then we also have the same thing for the install CD. We have an overlay directory there, which we use for our installation scripts. Not everything's in the GUI. Occasionally it is easier to do something in a script, and it's nicer to kind of go back and forth between the two. In the future, here's some of the things we are working on. We're working on a thin client server, PBI, which lets you basically turn PC-BSD into a thin client server. And actually, I got that working this week. It takes about 20 seconds to install, and we have a fully functional thin client set up. Another thing we're talking about doing is a backup and restore GUI, which again, for end users, just want to back up all their data, all their pictures, or back up the entire system, back it up to a DVD or a file on network. We're going to develop a GUI for that. A little bigger project would be developing a remote management tool. This would be something you use in a business or a server environment where you may have 500 clients and you want to organize them by groups and say, okay, I want the engineers to have these applications, roll out this application automatically to the engineers. We want the secretaries to have this application, roll out to them, all graphically oriented with a command line backend. Another thing we're talking about doing is moving the PC-BSD ports into a private directory as well. This is one thing that's kind of caused a problem for some FreeBSD guys coming over to PC-BSD is when you get your install done, do a package info, you see a ton of ports installed, obviously. That's how we built it. But what happens when you start monkeying with those and removing them? All of a sudden you reboot and no more KDE, no more X, something breaks. So we're talking about merging our ports into their own package DB, own directory, so you get your own default install. You can have a clean ports tree, build anything you want, and it won't touch your working system. So if you want to go build a copy of GNOME or work on a development library or something, it's not going to mess with your working desktop. So you always have that reliable fallback that I'm still going to be able to boot up and get my email in the morning. And that's pretty much the end of what I was here to talk about today, just kind of give a brief overview. Are there any questions? Yes?
Just out of curiosity, since this seems to be more of a desktop GUI-based version of FreeBSD, of course, have you guys thought about also going down the same route as Red Hat and Fedora with kickstarting machines? It would require quite a bit of rework if you guys...
If somebody wants to do it, sure. I haven't personally looked at doing anything like that. Again, it depends on the community. If there's a need and somebody wants to offer, just like with any other open source project, I would entertain the idea of putting something like that in there. But at the moment, no, I don't have it on my list to use personally.
Because that would allow you to deploy hundreds, potentially, of machines.
Well, one thing we talked about doing is with the Pixie server boot up, for example, where you can distribute images of PC-BSD, just plug it in, boots up, images your system, you're good to go. And I had an idea in the back of my mind that when the backup tool is written, it will work with that. You can build your desktop, create an image of it, and then roll that out via Pixie across to as many clients as you want. So yeah, that's something that will probably happen in the future. I just got to get all the pieces put together to do it. So. Cool. Any other questions? Oh.
When I did the first cut, it would be really helpful to have a Pixie boot for this because you hand it to your IT guy. And the way I did it, I did one of the first Pixie boots, and all that I did was I built an image that once you had it set up, that it was if you boot any box, you Pixie it, it would get whatever, it would get FreeBSD on it, no matter what. And you sort of put that caveat out there, just do that. This would load PC-BSD on your box, and just give them like an ISO image for that.
Sure.
You will get people like IT guys just sort of grabbing it.
Well, that probably is one thing we'll have to add to the Pixie server module then, where it just does that. It says, hey, roll maybe an option during the booting even that says just install PC-BSD to the system. And that's probably one of the ways we'll do it. I'd like to do the option where you have the ability to install customized images, not just a default install, but we'll obviously do a default install as well. Yeah.
So I had a problem loading PC-BSD, or I can't remember which one it was, maybe 1.5, and the screen came up perfectly in X when you're in the startup, and then you go into the X configuration, and it was completely unable to generate a configuration that would work, even though it's running on X.
Sure.
So it would really, really nice if it had a button on it that says, whatever the hell you're doing right now, just do that, because that's working.
It actually does that in 7. There's a skip option at the bottom where you can skip the X configuration, and it just uses the same one it was using at that moment to bring up your desktop. So, yeah, that's a common problem, because some people go in, they can't figure out how to make their X work, and they're just like, hey, I just want to get into the desktop, let me in. So you go ahead and choose skip. Yes?
My question regarding how do you deal with this elevated privileges thing? Do you do anything clever about it? Obviously, user needs to have elevated privileges to install packages and things like that.
Nothing clever. It literally just asks you for your root password when you want to install a package.
Because that's not a concept that's sort of easily syncing with the regular desktop.
No, that is something somebody has to learn coming over. We don't have any special pseudo binaries or anything running that allows you to just double click.
Okay, so basically you have a checkbox saying, it says has a super user privileges, and every time you try to do something, it just asks for the root password.
It just asks for the root password. Yeah, if you double click a program, it says, hey, enter your root password to install.
I have one question for
Yeah.
from 7, PCBSD 7. In the system configuration or system tool, it has a checkbox that comes up and says, remember my password or whatever it is for next time or something, but it never does.
I'll have to check and see what
So I was wondering, what's it remembering the password for just that command or for the next two?
a KDE you mean? Yes, that's a KDE feature, and that only remembers it for that one command.
How useful.
Yeah, so and usually when you reboot, it goes away. So
But not
again,
just that, I mean,
don't
it's
really know
when
why
you-
they include that.
when you go in, you run it, and you do something like, I don't know, one thing like change a configuration, and then you go to something else and do it like 3 seconds later, and it asks you again, even though you check the things that to remember.
Yeah, that's something I might bring up to the KDE guys and say, hey, can we make this more useful, because that would be a better feature.
It's just a bad.
Yes?
Mics actually do work. I know you're targeting the end user market, so this is going to sound a little bit geeky, but in your network configurator, is there any support in there for IPv6?
Yes. Actually, we do. It's under the advanced tab, we just don't show it on the main screen, but you can go ahead and enable IPv6 on it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's there. I'm trying to think ahead a little bit. Anything else? Oh,
I got something in the same vein as his. On my work laptop, I installed desktop PSDs. That doesn't support web passwords. It only supports the hex. The hex keys. Does the PCBSD?
support plain text web passwords? Yeah, there's an option when you're setting up your wireless NIC, you can just say plain text or you can enter the hex key. That was something that went in the last 6 months. Any other questions? Excellent. Well, thank you guys. Oh, wait, just that. One more.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about incline you just mentioned?
That's something, like I said, we just started, we just got to build it this last week. Essentially, it's a PBI, which means you take a PC-BSD system with 2 NICs. Install this PBI, it asks you which NIC do you want to run the private Pixie server network on. It goes ahead and sets up DHCPD, all the settings you need, and then you boot up your Pixie clients. They bring up X with the XDCMP into the server, and they're presented with the login screen. So you can then go ahead and create user accounts and say, okay, you're ready to log in. It literally takes about 2 minutes to install. Now, we want to add some more options to it, again, like we talked about earlier, where you can maybe install PCBSD via that, roll out updates. I mean, there's a lot of things we'd like to do, but it was just, it's a work in progress. We just started it a couple weeks ago. So,
Chris,
yeah.
can you tell us what's coming down the pipe? What exciting vision do you have for the next release that you want after?
Like 7.1. Well, that's, the Pixie server is something we are working on. 7.1 is going to be based on, another caveat in case I didn't mention this. We've changed the numbering scheme, so we're not in 1.5 anymore. We're trying to stick with FreeBSD, so now we're in 7.0, and then when they release 7.1, we will release a version 7.1. That one's going to be based on KDE 4.2, which has a lot more new features, adds a printer GUI back into it finally, which has been messing. Again, the system management tool is something we talked about. We're hoping to have that developed so that it works better in a network environment for a business and being able to manage hundreds of systems. Again, that's probably next year. Yeah? Cool, thank you guys very much.